Hi, all. Thanks so much for watching Making Healthcare Work for You, Different Perspectives and Empowering Solutions. I'm Stephanie Fields, joined by my co-host, Dr. Apoorv Gupta, and today we're welcomed by Matthew Zachary, who is a 28-year survivor of brain cancer. He is the founder of Stupid Cancer, producer of award-winning documentary Cancer Mavericks, and the host of Out of Patience with Matthew Zachary. Thanks so much for being here.
It's a pleasure. Hello, everyone.
There is so much to cover with you. So I guess we'll start with your own personal journey with cancer. What was that experience like for you? That has to be terrifying. You were young when you were diagnosed. What do you think? What's going through your head, and what were the doctors like whenever you were getting that message?
Yeah, so let's ask all the viewers and the listeners to take a trip back to the 1990s, put it in your head, get the thoughts out there. Where were you in 1995? That was me. I was a college senior, and I was going to film school because I was a concert pianist and a film composer. And during that summer, my left hand stopped working for no reason, but there was a reason. It turns out I had brain cancer, but I was misdiagnosed for so many months, as one is when one is 21 years old, to the point where I couldn't play anymore. And they kind of said, "Oh, well, let's see if you're here in 6 months after surgery." And that was my story. It all started there. January 10th, 96 was my surgery. My last day of treatment was April 30th that spring. I could not go to grad school anymore because I couldn't play. I was sick as a dog. Actually, that makes dogs look well. I was sick as you could possibly imagine any human being. Radiation back then was Chernobyl meets Easy Bake Oven, maybe combined, cubed, very bad stuff. And I just had no, what do I say? I say I lost my life, but I didn't die. There you go. That's how I tell this story. It feels like, doesn't feel like my story. That's what I went through in my 20s. That was it. I laid on the couch, waited to die. Boom. My friends went off to college, or they abandoned me, or I was magnetic and there was, couldn't pick up paper clips and things. That's how cancer was. No one cared about who you were, and not to their fault. I'm not like, if only they cared about me. This was the 1990s. No one cared about anything in the 1990s. I mean, Brandon, and Brenda, maybe, but they were dwindling into the Party of Five universe. So all that stuff was my universe in the 1990s. I fell back to Plan B. I got a job working in advertising and marketing, changing ink in printers. Very, very good early start job. But eventually, I did rehabilitate myself, and I played piano a couple of years later. I recorded some CDs. Remember CDs? Compact discs. Those got in the hands of some doctors and nurses because I wanted the families at the place I was treated to hear my music, which I had written, which somehow found its way to pharma, and they bought a bunch of copies, and I gave concerts at cancer trade shows as like this putsy 22-year-old kid. What am I doing here? But that got the attention of Livestrong in its early heyday. And that was kind of what bifurcated the route. I kept working in the agency world, and I kept learning about cancer advocacy because I finally met people like me. It took me 6 years to do that. So it's just been the origin story is very unique. Who plans for this? But I didn't expect to fall into Livestrong and the early 2000s movements of pre-digital health, pre-internet, post-breast cancer war activism, post 9/11 security issues, and the word survivorship becoming a term. So that's phase one. That's how I got started.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for laying that out, Matthew. It's a really incredible. I was trying to position myself back to the 90s as you asked also, and I'm thinking, I hardly knew anything at that stage, and here you are grappling, with these heady issues and literally and kind of fighting for your life. I guess one thing I was thinking as you were talking there is that did the advocacy itself help you in your own personal fight against cancer? Is it healing for you? Do you find it therapeutic in a way? Or is it more about just raising awareness and fundraising for other people? Help us draw a little bit more of a closer link between what the advocacy does for the individual and or in general for the society at large.
So everything goes back to a joke, of course. So along my many misdiagnoses, comedy of terrors, so to speak, I was diagnosed Robitussin for brain cancer. And yep, didn't work. Just in case. Spoilers for those listening and watching, it didn't work. And so when I met those folks at Livestrong, one of them asked me, like, how'd you like to be a cancer advocate? And he's like, well, it would mean that someone else would not get Robitussin for brain cancer. I was like, all right, sign me up. I'm in. What can I do? But I was already so out of the woods that it's all like, if only this existed when I needed it, versus if only I knew it was there when I needed it. Because today things are there, you don't know they're there. Back then there was nothing to know could be there. So my recompense, or maybe my career transference psychology, dump over the last 20 years has been to make sure nobody gets Robitussin for brain cancer in whatever form or fashion that means. So Livestrong helped me realize that I had the potential to do something in advocacy, and it took the form of channeling my inner comic, inner artist, inner designer, graphic, and I built Stupid Cancer from scratch in 2007. I had a talk show, a live streaming talk show that kicked off the entire young adult cancer movement. All of that for years and years, the millions of bucks we raised for support and resources and whatnot were the recompense. All the things that I wished I had, I wanted to bring into existence for today's people in the 2000s.
What were those things? Because I thought it was interesting when you were talking about the 90s and you said nobody cared about anything. And that's a horrible place to be when you're dealing with really serious, literal life and death issues. So whenever you were able to do these things and start working with Livestrong and advocating for other people who have been in that position with you, for you, not prescribed cough medicine, what were those things that you were like, okay, people need this, they need to hear this, they need to do this, or they need this resource? What were those things on your list of like, this is how we got to start making this better?
I didn't know what those were until I met other people who did. And I stand upon great shoulders of luminaries from the 80s and 90s who were my mentors at the time, through Livestrong, through the NCI, the CDC, through all the other groups that I became admired in around between like 04 and 08. And one of them is my champion, the late Ellen Stovall, Stovall. You can put in show notes or whatnot. Ellen Stovall is my hero. She was my first mentor. She is one of the single most influential human beings in all of healthcare, citizen activism. And there was an event in 1998 called the March on Washington, which the National Coalition for Cancer Survivorship hosted, with like several thousand people on the mall demanding the very notion that we deserve the right to have quality of life attached to quality of care. How amazing to think that we deserve to live with a quality of life. And that set forth in motion so many different things that we just, I'm a student of history, we just don't appreciate because we don't know. Antiemetics. How nice to not throw up 40,000 times a day. We forced the industry to make them. They were not going to make them because they didn't make the money. We forced the industry to make Emend and Procrit and white cell things that helped us live our lives staying on treatment. Those things were the most important things that we just we're not even in the mind's eye of medicine. With an asterisk, because pediatric cancer was pediatric cancer. That's a whole universe. That's 10,000 a year. There's nothing good there. But when you're not a pediatric cancer patient, should you care about getting back to work, your fertility, dealing with your parents, all these things that are hard enough when you're not dealing with cancer? That's what this came down to. It is your lifestyle, who you are as a person, and what your goals were as a human being in this world were just as relevant as to the biology and the genetics of what we needed to give you so you hopefully didn't die.
What was the mechanism, Matthew, of that engagement? And how did you, when you say you forced these companies, I'm trying to envision, were you sitting in boardrooms with pharmaceutical executives trying to help them understand, hey, these are the struggles we're going through? Were there petitions? Were there policy changes? Help us get a little bit more granular with that, because it's really compelling. And I think I for one, and I'm sure our audience could learn a lot about how you really take advocacy and make these dramatic changes that you've been able to spearhead.
I'll quantify it's a royal we. wasn't just me. I wasn't even active until 2004, and I met all these people who were active in the 1990s. So if you Google the March on Washington, the Cancer March on Washington, 1998, the breast cancer sit-ins and die-ins at Genentech and whatnot, these were human beings like the AIDS quilt. We rallied, we voted, we channeled our inner American voter angst that we deserve this. It's not okay that this is the way the system is. And that's how that manifested, through the will of the people who didn't know they had the power to speak up in an organized way and make the things happen that would never happen if we didn't do it. That's where survivorship came from. And under that umbrella begat best practices and standards of care and peer-reviewed published studies and long-term survivor reports and academic standards and billing codes. Mental health wasn't a thing back then. You just like walk it off therapy was the 1990s for most of us, or the 1980s for most of us. The very notion that someone could ask you what's important to you before we give you treatment. Oh, I notice your ovaries work. You want to have a baby one day. These things were not even discussed at the time. It became institutionalized as a standard best practice to treat human beings first and biology second. And it took 30 years to do that. We still struggle with these things now, but every time we make some progress, there's an ebb tide to realize what else we haven't seen before.
I feel like there's so much money that goes into it and so much amazing work that is going into it, the way that you're doing and describing that there have been advancements. So are they happening at a rate that you think is happening with some of these other things that really have gone from a death sentence to something that you can manage? Or is it just that cancer is so big and there's so many different types of cancer that we're not hearing of all of the different good work there is? So should we feel hope that change is happening, or should we still think, holy crap, there's a lot to do, or both?
All right. My response is if anyone has children, you don't really notice them growing up until you don't see them for 2 weeks. Or if you have a niece and a nephew, you just see through photos, you show up a week later, they're like 9 feet tall. It's hard to see progress in the moment when you're dealing with it. Cancer is 30 billion different things. There are viral driven cancers, there are environmental driven cancers, there are biological, genetic, all these different things. There's no one soup for it. So you have to pick the poisons you can. We look at how the viral based cancers, the HPV based cancers are curable. If you do the things you're supposed to do, hashtag Gardasil, not a sponsor, go do that. You just won't get it. That is the absolute definition of prevention. We start to look at how much we fought for lowering screenings and improving diagnostics of women with denser breast tissue. And more women are getting diagnosis stage 1 or stage 2 than ever before. Of course, they're getting the damn screenings at 40 and not 50. Colorectal is going through a moment right now these days, too, because of Cologuard and because of all these other things that are going on that are now genetically AI poop based. That's crazy stuff to put in perspective. We're now doing AI poop testing versus just dying 20 years ago. So I try to put a perspective in. It's never going to be perfect. It's no perfect. Is it better? Yes. Let's talk about DEI, or oh my God, Black people get cancer too. Who knew? This was let's just focus on getting as many people as we can to not die, and then the ebb tide was, wow, we can do this now. How do we address the systemic issues that these people don't have the same advantages to get the things that we benefited from over here? So that was there. Then we moved to young adult cancer, which is like, oh my God, you have an employer-based insurance program. This is not Medicare. How do we help you go through less crap, right? That's a whole state-based insurance reimbursement, forcing legislative stuff with the payers and the employers thing. That's 80,000 people a year. Then we have all the kids that didn't die in the 70s and 80s that are our age now because they had cancer as kids. What do we do with them? They have unique needs. So all these things were progress-based, sociological reasonings. Oh my God, we're here now. What do we do now? So I just try to consistently enforce looking back at history. Past is not prologue, because this is revolution type of stuff. Everyone like poo-pooed the Human Genome Project. Now you can like do anything you want, which is scary at the same time. And the last part of this ebb tide now is your genetics define your outcome. DNA is not your destiny, but we now have a whole other system in place of genius people and computers doing things that can detect things before you even get them. This notion of pre-cancer and pre-patient are words that will be flowing into the jargoning lexicon in the next couple of years that no one will understand but us. But that's the whole point is, as long as someone's making money on it, we'll be fine. But it does take the power of the people to realize they have the capacity to do what we need to get done when properly organized. And that's advocacy.
It's so incredible, Matthew, what you're talking about, because it's kind of a part of what I don't, personally understand or realize that it's even actually underway. And I guess this is related to a previous question that I'd asked, but was any of this activity, I mean, you've contributed to and been a part of, I realize it's the royal we, as you said, a lot of people involved, but was any of this activity organized as such, or was there just many zillions different pockets of activity and it's just all led to this? Or how did this kind of get coordinated, wherein if you look at it, it's only been about 20-25 years since that time, relatively short period of time, and yet a dramatic kind of changes that have already been made. So talk to us a little bit about what kind of coordination needed to happen or didn't have to happen behind the scenes for this to organically take off.
I'm going to oversimplify this response. The government's run by 18-year-olds. I'll say it again. The government's run by 18-year-olds, maybe 20-year-olds. Every single elected official has a college-aged or a grad school-aged intern or a staffer running their office. That's the only way to get things done, is to talk staffer. If you can talk staffer, you can get a bill passed. The question is, who is talking to the staffer about what? And what helps the staffer do this to the legislative person to pass the bill? It's that ridiculously simple. It's just that there's 40 billion things happening at the same time. So you need to focus on 40 billion things, but you need to know the secret chemistry of how the government works, which is it takes one voice. You don't need 30,000 people on the Hill. You need one person. You need one, because just like I can't relate. You don't expect that. I hope you don't relate to a cancer patient, which means you happen to have had it. I don't want you to have it. I don't want you to ever have to have it. Please don't relate to me. Like, let's level set these things. I remember hiring people on my company and they're like, do I have to have cancer to work here? It's like, no, you don't. And if you did, I'd be fired for hiring you, because you can't do that. This is it's gratifying that there's empathy where there is empathy. But Hillary was right. It takes a village. It's a real metaphor. I would say the breast cancer wars were the greatest amalgam. It was a huge movement. The HIV wars, the breast cancer wars, the 1990s were phenomenal. Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Think of all the huge social justice movements raised by mostly women and the gay community in the 1990s. That's never going to happen again, because we got the things we needed to get done. We got the flywheel spinning on these things. The 2000s were all about, let's get people the dignity they need to live the life they deserve, regardless of what their care is. That was 10 years, maybe a little more. And now we move to DEI and underserved communities and genetic treatments, and we're moving into biomarker care, and the system's getting more complicated because of progress. You can hate on healthcare all you want. I think it's working by design, which is terrible. It shouldn't be designed this way. My documentary, The Cancer Mavericks, A History of Survivorship, is an 8-part narrative series about the 50-year history of advocacy in America. Everything I'm talking about here on the show is in this documentary. It starts in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. It's very chronological. And it talks about how there really have only been 3 or 4 great consumer health voter uprisings, so to speak, or citizen activations at the massive national policy level. And the last one was the one that I ran, which was the young adult cancer movement, which is all about the dignity and survivorship for Gen Xers, Gen Yers, long-term peds, and anyone in their fertile years. And the breast cancer wars came before that. The HIV wars came before that. The ADA wars, the Orphan Drug Act wars. All of these things happen because of human beings. And I'm seeing between now and the end of the decade, we're gonna have another great one. And I mean great and like a really good one, where we're moving into a place now where blood tests can determine whether you're going to get pre-cancer. Like you're not at risk for cancer, you're at risk for cancer. How do you make that something on a blackboard people understand? You can't. But just like you can now find out whether you're half Nigerian and half French at Walgreens with a blood test, will people want to get that same test at their pharmacy to see if they were at risk for this, and this?
That's what I was going to ask you. Do people want to know if they have that? Because is that terrifying? And then it's almost like getting life insurance in a way, like just because you have it doesn't mean that you're going to die. So like getting this information should help you. So how do you get over that?
I feel like there's going to be an incentivization for people to get the test so they have cheaper insurance policies. Basically, we're forcing you to find out if you're going to be at risk or something, so you're not going to cost us as much money if you don't die. That's capitalism. That's how it's going to work. And to be honest with you, employers may require this to be something you get, like a COVID test. You have to get this test to work here because we need to assess your risk. We can't not hire you or fire you based on the results, but we know that your premiums will be different because of that. And then there'll be all sorts of lawsuits and things are going to ensue. But we're looking at an odd sense of progress. Wouldn't we like a day where no one gets anything? Not possible, but where you can actually know in advance that you can do something to fork yourself in the road and go this way instead of that way. And I'll give you one example. A colleague of mine is working on a biomarker in esophageal cancer. And what it does is it tests during an endoscopy for if you have like Barrett's syndrome or like high GERD or whatever the term is for it. You can get this test, and they're increasing accuracy and whatnot, and then false positives, but it predicts pre-esophageal cancer. Pre-esophageal cancer. So if you have Barrett's and you get this test and you're at risk for pre-esophageal cancer, you can decide that day to get healthier and improve your esophageal lining and eat different foods, and you will never, ever, 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 ever get esophageal cancer, proverbially. How great is that? But would that test ever be accepted by GI doctors? Would it be covered by insurance? Would employers cover it? Would it be reimbursable by CMS? We don't know. Is it affordable? Can it be at Walgreens one day? We don't know, but we have to be visionary about where we'd like things to go based on where we've been. And advocacy means different things today. Advocacy isn't dying on doing a die-in in front of Genentech to demand a quality of life breast cancer medicine for Herceptin. Like, you don't need to do that anymore. I hope we don't have to do that anymore. But advocacy is different today, especially because everything's noisy and the internet ruined the entire planet. So organizing and mobilizing and galvanizing is very different. So advocacy has to be much more precision honed.
It was interesting talking about the tests and being able to tell what you're going to get. Because of all things, let it be known that I am not domestic. I let my husband know that on our second date. Like, if you want somebody who's going to cook dinner every night, that I ain't your girl. Okay. So holding true to that. But for some godforsaken reason, Rachel Ray ended up on my TV at some point. And she was talking about, it must have been last October, actually. I can't believe it's been that long. She was talking to people about breast cancer research and talked about this one test called Signatera that could could tell you if you're going to get cancer again or if you're at risk. And I emailed, I unfortunately know a lot of people who have had cancer currently or in the past. And so I emailed one oncologist I know and said, hey, would this make sense for this person to have? And she said, I actually haven't heard of that test. We're using this other test. I think it was Guardant. And they were a little bit different between the two of them. So she researched the Signatera and said, yes, actually, this would be really great. So basically, it sends the cancer tissue away and then creates a fingerprint of that cancer and then can detect with, I think it was like breast cancer and colon cancer gives you 9 months lead time, which is a tremendous amount of time in cancer. And then you can get, monitoring and treatment and things like that. But I said, when we were making a decision whether or not this was something this person should have, I said, if we get this test and it shows that this could happen or that's positive, is there an action we can take? Or are we just going to be scared out of our minds thinking that this could happen? And she said, no, there are steps. Here's what they are. And ultimately ended up doing that. And thank God they've all been clear for multiple people that I know. But then I sent it out to everybody because I know so many people who have had cancer and said, hey, I don't know if you know about this test. And they didn't. And now they're getting it done. And so I'm in the Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh area. I'm like, have you heard of Signatera? You've got to look into this because it makes a difference. I mean, anything you can do, but it is that like there had to be an action, because if there wasn't an action, I don't know that I just want to be scared.
Yeah. Right. That's like, why would you want to know this if there's nothing you can do about it?
Well, it just leaves us, with contemplating. I think based on what you're saying, Matthew, and Stephanie's recent story as well, I think the point is that we all have to be advocates, and we all have to find ways to amplify our voice and get that message out there. Matthew, I found it intriguing what you just said about in the age of social media, you have to be more precise, because that thought has been going through my mind that when you started this journey, you mentioned it a few times that you didn't have all these tools that we now take for granted, 20 years in. Is it making your life's, advocates' lives easier? Is it making it harder? Is it more complicated because there's so much false news out there as well? But let's talk a little bit about what kind of precision is required, and how are you leveraging the latest tools and communities and social media to create the advocacy that you think is needed?
I'm going to channel my inner Gen Xer as always and say that we have a very unique perspective on the value of social media as it pertains to it not existing, coming into existence, hitting a stride, and then turning into an absolute shit fest. Those are the four faces of social media. And not having it was terrible, but you didn't know you needed it because it didn't exist. So you fumpered through the white pages and the whatever, It just starting up, I was like, oh wow, I can talk to weirdos and ask them things that on AOL. Okay, great. Then it was like, oh my God, Friendster, do I really want to know you? I could put a fake picture of myself up there, and then it became like the online forum boards where it's like a competition. I had worse cancer than you, and the catfighting started because that's human nature. And then Facebook became its real thing, and Stupid Cancer had 1 million people on there that were rallying for trials and studies and all these wonderful things. We were all together. We dropped our egos. We dropped our biologies. It was working really, really well. And then the Twitters and the Instagrams and the TikToks showed up, and it just turned hostility, inner rage, transference, and confirmation bias into a cesspool of dehumanity. I hate social media. No one follows me. They listen to me, they read me, and they see me. And that's like the 1950s. If you want, I'm on the radio, I'm on stage, I'm on television, and I write a column. Analog, old school media, not social. I have yet to see, and I want to be proven right or wrong, which is my whole dogma, prove me wrong, that social media today has any relevant, signifying value as it did 10 years ago in healthcare. Prove me wrong. At Matthew Zachary on Twitter, that I don't check.
Wow. Well, that's a really interesting call to arms. I wonder if people will take you up on that. Matthew, I kind of generally agree with you. The one part of social media that I'm really enjoying as I've gone through my own social media journey is LinkedIn, where I find that the level of the conversation is just much more professional, much more collaborative. I've met Stephanie through LinkedIn, really, essentially. We've become great friends. I just feel like there's at least people there because it's a professional veneer that people are trying to connect with each other, wanting to actually do things together. I don't know how that plays into the advocacy realm per se, but maybe like you, I've kind of become disenchanted with Facebook, and I wasn't a big user of other sites like Twitter. But what are your thoughts about a sphere like LinkedIn? Does that help with advocacy?
I think the healthcare world of LinkedIn is the last bastion of decency on the internet right now, minus like there's like the Doximities and the whatnots that are like these micro communities that they're fine because they're regulated, they're monitored, you pay to be there, you don't want to have crap. LinkedIn's free, so you're the product. And what I've seen on LinkedIn, I've got like maybe 100,000 or so people. I've been invested in LinkedIn since 2008. It's the one thing I really dug into, my show and LinkedIn. And the challenge with LinkedIn, it's not for everyone, right? It is a wonky echo chamber of multiple different vertical industries, and that's fine. But the way you can use it strategically is great. There are collaborations, there are live. It's a wonderful platform that has yet to fall apart. And when it falls apart, it all falls apart for us.
Thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate this conversation. We've covered a whole realm of things. So thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here. I hope I've not irritated your listeners and viewers too much.
Oh, it's incredible. I think you're waking us up. Thank you, Matthew.
And thank you all for watching. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.